it will be helpful if folks have to log off, because work or life interrupts, and then you'll be able to go back to the recording if you need to catch up on anything. Okay. So I'm recording, and I was just welcoming everybody to the Native Focused 40-Hour Sexual Assault Advocacy Training. We want to really get started, but before we do anything, we want to get started in a good way. So we have asked Linda Thompson, our revered Linda Thompson, to offer our deeply respected and loved Linda Thompson to say a few words. Would you like to do that, Linda?
Sure, that would be great. Thank you for coming into this training, for signing up, and for whatever you do in your community to help the people. This is Native tribal focused training. So it's not said to make anybody upset or cause any kind of problems. There are unique needs and difficult situations that happen to our people that have made it epidemic in the realm of sexual violence. So with that, I'm asking each of you to take really good care of yourselves during this time, in whatever way you do that, however you take good care of you. For some people, it's going to mean that you drink a lot of water, have that near you. For some people, it's lighting a candle, because there is a lot of dark spaces that this can open up inside each of us. I had been an advocate for many, many years. I am from Boys Fort, but I also have been enrolled at Leech Lake and ties to Mille Lacs Lake through my grandpa, but I am Anishinaabe from Minnesota, but I spent a long time with the Dakota people in North Dakota. About 16 years of my life I lived on the reservation at Spirit Lake. So I say welcome to each and every one of you. I have medicines also. I have lit some medicine. We have whatever you use to take good care of yourself. For some people during difficult times, it's good to hold one of our ancestors when it's hard stuff to listen to. One of our staff made what's called wasna, which is an offering for spirit. Also the use of a rattle. Anything you use to take good care of yourself, please do that. You can think, well, I've learned all about this, but this amount of training is deep. It goes through different areas of our communities, and sometimes it can feel like a sore has been opened, or it is like an ulcer inside of our spirit. So I want to encourage you to take good care of you. And if you need to go off camera or go outside, that can be really helpful too, connecting and reconnecting with the earth. And if you need advocacy, we can refer you to an advocate, but this is not the circle for advocacy at this time. It's a circle for advocates who are gaining and building their skills and their tools and building their love for their people. We do have advocates available, and staff is online to be able to support you. You can reach out to in the chat and they'll direct you, because sometimes it's hard to hear. But I'm going to say a prayer. I have some medicine in my hand, and I am on my way home. I just got back from an appointment and I saw a big eagle circling over the road. And to some of us, that means something. To some people, it means nothing. But to me, it reminds me of the connectedness that we have with all living beings and with this earth. And we only get to be here for a short time. So let's bring our best selves forward to the best of our ability to learn what we have to on behalf of our people. So I did find this song, and this is by the Red Shadow Singers. So hold on. Grandfather, grandmother, creator, universe, we ask that you be here with us today and every time we meet in this virtual circle. Help us remember our connectedness to you, to all of our people, to the birds, to the animals, to the land, to the water. Help us to remember our relatives who can't speak up for themselves. That includes children, girls, boys, women, men, elders. Anybody can succumb to this type of violence that we're going to be learning about. We also know that in reaching out that we take a risk in exposing vulnerable parts of ourselves. We ask that you help us to call upon your energy and whatever energy that is larger than ourselves to be able to do the work that is sacred in our communities. We ask that you please hear some of our prayers and our worries and our concerns. Some of us have come into this circle because we're at work today and we signed up, but we come with a heaviness in our heart. Some of us are walking with grief, with significant loss, with sickness, with illness, with disputes with people, with unhealthy thoughts and sometimes unhealthy feelings that inadvertently end up hurting us. I ask that you lift all of that up off of us, that you could help us to hear what the spirits of those presenting are sharing, those supporting. Each of us is a teacher, each of us is a student. I ask that you help us to learn from each other so that we can take what we learn and what we feel in our heart is right and help our people. We ask that you be a part of these conversations, that we remember that we're never by ourselves in these tough talks, and sometimes there's a lot of laughs. That's one of the medicines you gave us. Help us to remember to take good care of us and to love our people, our families, and most of all ourselves. Help us to heal the parts that are still hurting, and to know that we only get to be here for a short amount of time in this circle of life, and that we want to have balance. I ask this for all of my relations. Watch over our time together, Creator. Thank you. I'm going to go outside with this.
Be quiet, Linda. Yeah, that's some good stuff right there. And so however, your prayers or your thoughts go out, let them all out to the universe. I got some medicine burning over here too. Sending that out to everybody across wherever we are. All right. So for today, the trainers are going to be Linda Thompson, myself, I'm Christine Davidson. Nicole Matthews is going to be joining us a little bit later. And then we have our ASL interpreters, and that is Amber and Debbie. And so if there are folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, definitely connect with those two in the chat. Let me know, and we can make sure that you all are connected and that you're getting the things that you need to be able to participate and see what's going on here. Okay, just let us know that. We'll do whatever we can to make it better. We're still in a learning curve with the deaf and hard of hearing community, so we want to always try to do better. Yeah. And then for the chat box moderators, we got a pretty big group. It's going to grow. Today was a holiday weekend, so we know that folks are kind of navigating and getting back into the groove. But there's about 130, 140 people registered. And we also know that things change, right? Like sometimes you have a survivor who comes in, or you have appointments, And we want you to handle all those things, right? And so the chat box moderators will be here to kind of help answer questions. It's our coworkers are Deb Bush, Afton Delgado, and Rebecca Baylog. They'll be here to answer any questions that I miss. I can't always read the chat in time, or whoever's talking at the time. And you'll just kind of meet a bunch of us along the way here. So Linda was kind of talking about, those medicines, those 4 sacred elements. I mean, folks may have heard of the medicine wheel, right? So there's like the north, south, east, and west. There's, the 4 colors, so red, yellow, black, and white. There is the ages, an infant, a young person, an adult, an elder. And so we're constantly moving in a circle. And our elements are the same, right? Fire, air, earth, water, and those move. So the spirits who live in those elements are here and available for all of us. No human is needed to connect with our natural elements, right? And so if those things ground you or help you in any way, we welcome you to have those by your side. I have my water with me that I'll occasionally take a moment and take an intentional drink, and just letting that water know how much I love this water here, and to help me, right? To nourish me, to keep me alive, this water that keeps everybody alive. So make sure you're drinking a lot of water. Even if it comes in the form of tea or coffee or Mountain Dew, maybe not Mountain Dew, I'm just kidding, but hydrate, because we're going to be metabolizing a lot of information. We live and breathe this stuff every day in this line of work. Being human in the world can be painful. So we're metabolizing all the time, but we're having some really condensed, open, difficult conversations sometimes. And so we just want to caution our bodies to metabolize that information in the way that you need to. Water is a good way to help wash it through our mind and our heart and our spirit and our body. Okay. Whatever medicines that you use in your region, welcome to share those with others if it may be useful to others. If you're new to understanding, ask questions. This is an environment where we're all teachers and we're all learners. And so sharing that information, either jumping on the microphone or typing it in the chat, we welcome all of that. So the people who are talking, we're just here to kind of hold the space open to talk about some things, but you all are the experts in your own lives, and you all are helping people to be experts in their own lives as we do sexual assault advocacy in our lives and in our work, right? So feel free to jump on and share your knowledge any way you see fit. I have my sage and cedar and sweetgrass and water and stones, fire, air, well, the air conditioner is on blast right now. But, you can open a window or sit by a window. Some people like a little fan, or what do they call those, diffusers, where you can drop a little essential oil in there. And just something to kind of keep the air moving around us while we're metabolizing all this information. Because, we're together Tuesdays and Thursdays for 4 hours for a month, right? And it's a lot. It can be a lot. And so we just want to take good care of ourselves. Welcome, Cheryl. Very cool. Welcome, welcome. Okay. The other thing we want to talk about right on the very front end is to be thinking about the habits of white supremacy culture. And so interrupting those habits is really important to us. We want to, things like that have become accustomed to place high importance on, right? Like a schedule, the agenda, the times, the written word. Like these are things that in our society today have become, the priority. But we're going to ask us to kind of open up our hearts and our minds and interrupt our habits around that. we will get done and say and experience what we need to hear in this time together. You all are a particular spirit that came together with this content and at this time, and that's everything. That's all we need, right? And so if things, if we have a longer conversation or a shorter conversation about something, that also is meant to be. And so we can interrupt our habits around being flexible. Don't be inflexible, be flexible, be open. Oh yeah, Afton's our chat moderator, she's saying asking questions privately are, you're totally able to do that either to me or to some of the co-hosts there. We'll all be able to answer those questions. Okay. And then the right to comfort. These are uncomfortable conversations that we'll be having throughout the month. They're not always uncomfortable, but sometimes they can be. They can be super personal. Our experiences around sexual violence can be very personal. And oh my gosh, I just love seeing Ashley's cat wanting to be a part of the meeting. We welcome cats and dogs and kids. Kids are very welcome. Cooking dinner is very welcome. Okay. So that right to comfort, if things get uncomfortable, we, name that. What is uncomfortable for you? Can we talk it out a little bit? Where is the places that need more tenderness or more understanding? Okay, so let's interrupt our habits around staying silent around things. Conversations about sexual violence or racism or oppression, patriarchy. There's all kinds of things that can be uncomfortable to talk about. Sexism, homophobia, ableism. So there's these places that are tender for us, but let's be open, okay? And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about this as we go. And we're not talking about so much dismantling these right now, but we're talking about interrupting our habits around them, right? If you wanted to look into a deeper to dismantling them, like in real time, look up some folks like Kimberly Crenshaw, Bell Hooks, right? There's some folks that are doing really deep work. Oh, my family's coming home. It's all good. This is real life happening in real time, right? Right. So yeah, I think that's all I'll say about this. Some logistics. So we do have our ASL interpreters with us. We'll be recording each day. We'll be doing the written transcript so you can see the words and read along if you wish, okay? Please reach out if there's additional resources that you need to be able to get this information in the best way. We talked about the fact that we're recording, so the things that we say here, there's a confidentiality that comes with, this space and this kind of environment, but also it is going to be recorded and then sent out over the internet. So be ever conscious of confidentiality and not naming names. That's just really important, that we want to honor people's privacy. Does that make sense to folks? Yeah. There's also many mandated reporters in this space, and we just want to name ahead of time that as a mandated reporter, you are required to report if there's harm happening to a child, if somebody is going to harm themselves, or if they're going to harm others, right? And so what you say in this space, just know that there are mandated reporters that are hearing it, and we want everybody to just have an educated decision on what they say in this space, okay? We're going to be taking lots of breaks. If you need a break, take a break. You don't need our permission to go eat or get some water or some food or take a walk outside. Take care of yourself. If you want to lay on the floor, if you want to go lay in the sun, we welcome that. I know folks are at work, so you don't get to lay on the floor at work, at least not where I work, right? So but take care of yourselves. That's what we mainly place high value in. For the evaluations, we'll be just sending out a SurveyMonkey link at the very end of the training. So then it's just real easy. It's just like a 10-question survey that you would just click the buttons. And then will be a little space for you to add comments in. Okay. Stay hydrated. We talked about that. That's really important. Water's our first medicine. Feel free to do any kind of projects that you want. You can bead, sew, doodle, paint. Folks have made lace. They've made all kinds of things, clay. They've just done amazing projects because you're sitting here in front of the screen, but you're not required to be on the screen. You're, you're welcome to just do what you need to do so you can hear the information the best way possible. Yeah. And we would love if you shared your projects with us. That'd be really cool to see what y'all are doing. Okay. Taking good care, we talked a lot about that. So Zoom we're kind of more familiar now with Zoom than we ever thought possible, right?
You mean today?
Oh.
You mean today? Because I was outside several times throughout yesterday, and it was just like, it's kind of.
There we go. So that happens. Sometimes we accidentally unmute. And sometimes we accidentally let our camera off. And so when you have your camera off, just be conscious that if it accidentally comes on, we're going to see what you have going on. And just be conscious, right? The microphone's the same way. Sometimes you'll just accidentally come off. And it's okay, of course, but also real life is happening. So just be conscientious of it. Use the chat box. Afton has been really awesome about typing in there, about asking questions. Okay, using the reaction icons at the bottom. So I believe it is in that bar. No worries, Mary, no worries at all. You don't even have to apologize. I'm just saying, we know what happens. There's a reactions thing at a bar at the bottom, so you can do a thumbs up or thumbs down or heart or slow down, those kinds of things. And sometimes I'm not going to see it. So, that's where the moderators come in. Because sometimes I get going on something and then I'm just talking like, so if I need to slow down, slow me down, yeah? Or talk louder, something like that. Oops. Oops. There's polling questions, so that will be coming up next, okay? And then, of course, we talked about our sacred elements, the earth, fire, water, and air, and be sure to use those as often as you need to, okay? So that is the first poll. What is your familiarity with Zoom? It's a multiple choice question. Can you see it? So when we did this training the first time virtually, we had been doing it for years in person, like all in a room together for 8 hours a day for a week straight. And then all of a sudden we had to go virtual. And it was quite a shock to the system. If you remember 2 years ago, when you Zoomed your sister in another state, and then all of a sudden now we're all trapped at home, all of our meetings, all of our work, it was an adjustment, right? You're welcome to type it in the chat too if you're on the phone and unable to see the, this is just a question asking about your familiarity with Zoom. So most folks are pretty familiar. Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop that. So 9 of us are pros, 34 of us are pretty familiar, 6 of us are somewhat new. So if there's things that are unfamiliar to you, you can type it in the chat. If you're having trouble opening up the speaker, or if there's something that you're curious about, you can just ask it, right? Because there is a way for the speaker view for you to expand or shrink who you're seeing. Okay. And I'll ask that question next. So we're pretty familiar. We're pretty familiar. I'll end that. So most of us are pretty familiar. That's helpful to know. And then the next poll is, or did it? There we go. Oh, you did switch. Oh, Marianne, I wanted to do that so bad, but it conflicted with a bunch of stuff I had. Oh, Marianne, I really wish I could have been there with you. Okay, and then this poll is asking, have you participated in a 40-hour sexual assault advocacy training? And if you have, was it Native focused? Yeah, the SWIP folks are amazing. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the poll and show you the results. You can type it in the chat if you're just getting back to the computer. So 17 of us have participated in a 40-hour. 31 of us, this is new. Maybe not new information, but within the context of a 40-hour training, it's new. And then 3 are not sure. And then was that training Native focused? And for 7 of us, it was Native focused. For 34 of us, it was not, right? 3 said parts of it were Native focused, and then 7 of us are not sure, okay? And, you know, there's no right or wrong here. This is just, you know, for us to get a little bit of feel for the experience in the room. And also, just because you've gone through a training doesn't make you the expert on all things. And if you've never had a training before in your life, it doesn't mean you're not an expert, right? So it's that both and thing. We have a lot of lived experience and a lot of work experience, and all of that matters, right? And so this just helps us be thinking about, you know, how to frame things up. And also, we invite you to share your expertise in the room here. So when things are, you'll feel it in your heart, you know, it will happen like in your stomach or in your chest or in your throat. Something will well up in you that you feel the need to say. And we invite you to add that gift here. Gift us with that knowledge. Don't hold it back because of some weird structure about who's on the screen and all the things, okay? As a matter of fact, let's just practice this 1 second. Everybody unmute your microphone and just say hello.
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 Oh my goodness.
Awesome. So don't be afraid to just either jump. You can just unmute yourself and say, hey, this is so-and-so I'd like to add, and then say it. Or you can raise your hand. There's a little reaction thing. Excuse me, in that bar, if you click in the reaction box, there's a little hand raise, and then it will raise your hand and you'll jump to the top of the little square tiles here. Oh, Annette has no mic or camera. Well, welcome, Annette, and we'll still see your chat. So that's important too. If you have something to add, type it in the chat, right? Even if it's something you just want to know more about, or you just don't agree with it, whatever it is, bring it to the room, okay? All right. So it's so funny because we've been talking all this time and we haven't introduced ourselves as staff, but that's for a reason, because we're just people here like you trying to do good work in the world. And it's really not about us, it's about you all. But in terms of a proper introduction, you know, I can start by saying for me, so Buju and Dinawe Maganida, hello, my relatives. Giwatayashik Indigo, the spirits know me as Giwatayashik. Magizi Indodame, I am Eagle Clan. Gawa Babaganikag Ishkonigan in Donjiba. So I live here. I'm from the White Earth Reservation. Yeah. No worries, Danielle. We'll see you next time. No worries. When you got to do things, you got to handle it. We know that. My gender pronouns, so I identify as she, her, hers. And I think that for some folks, they will be unfamiliar with the gender pronouns. And the reason for us here at MIWSAC that it's important for us to talk about our gender pronouns is that there is a privilege that comes with looking the way that I identify, right? So if you all look at me, I probably look female, right? You know, I have earrings and long hair and I got a little makeup on. And there's a privilege that comes with that, that I don't have any different feelings about who I am. I identify as a woman. I live in the world as a woman. So when you talk about, oh, Christine, you know, where did Christine go? Oh, she went to the restroom, right? And so, but if I did not identify with how I look, if I identified, maybe I identify as male, and my pronouns are he and him, or sometimes you'll hear people say they and them. And so when you were talking about Christine going to the washroom, you would say, oh, they went to the washroom, right? Or he went to the washroom. So while it's unfamiliar for some folks, it's really important to, when somebody tells you who they are, you follow that, you listen to that and adhere to that. And if you make a mistake and get it wrong, you just apologize, make it right, and keep trying to do better, okay? Just in our core advocacy, when somebody tells you who they are, you follow that, okay? So it's really important to bring that into this space here as well, okay? And I told you that I'm from White Earth, so I live in northern Minnesota. We have 11 reservations and tribal communities here in Minnesota, and I'm from the White Earth one. And if I were an element, I'm a Capricorn, so I'm pretty much an earth element. Sometimes I can be kind of too much in my head, get kind of flighty, talk too much, have too much stuff stirring in the brain. But for the most part, I'm super grounded in how I think and how I believe, and it's just all rooted in love for me, okay? And then I would like to invite, I don't think Nicole jumped on with us, but Linda, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself with this little?
So, sure. My name is Linda Thompson. Wasea Kwe Indigo Makwa Indurum. I am just saying, thank you, Christine, for helping me with that. My gender pronouns are she, her, hers. I am from Boys Fort, also Leech Lake and Mille Lacs Lake. If I were an element, I would be air.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And so for the moderators, I'll have you jump into that. So the next part is we're going to send you into quick breakout rooms. So everybody, don't worry. Don't worry. I know some folks love them and some folks hate them, but this is a chance for you to, because there's such a big group, there's no way for us to go through 69 people to do in person, one at a time introductions. So this is just a way for you to meet a few people in a smaller room. So a breakout room is just going to be a smaller room with 4 or 5 people in it. And so do this little introduction. Tell folks who you are, where you're from, what your gender pronouns are. If you were an element, would you be earth, fire, water, or air? And then share with folks why you chose a Native-focused 40-hour sexual assault advocacy training. So, per that other poll, there's lots of 40-hour trainings out there, and there's not a lot of Native-focused ones. So why did you choose this particular one? And share that with each other. And you'll just, you don't have to spend a lot of time on it. It can just take, just like 5 minutes. It took like a minute to share that information, right? And just share it with each other, okay? All right, I'm gonna send you guys out. And then I'll give you a 1-minute warning, and then it will just bring you back into this main breakout room, okay? And don't be shy. Don't be shy with each other, okay? All right, we'll see you in about 5 minutes. And yes, if anybody would like an ASL interpreter, quick message Debbie. Okay, okay, here we go. See you in 5 minutes. It's okay, Carla. Okay, 1 more minute. Folks back. Oh, welcome back. Hi, Blake. Nice to see your face. Oh, Carly, you tried to unmute yourself and left the room. Oh, that technology. Ah, I see some faces. Bonjour. So I know that technology is always a little wonky, and microphones and muting and unmuting and cameras and no cameras. So if that did happen and you were not able to share, you're welcome to type it in the chat. Tell us who you are. Even if you wish to share that information with all of us, I would love to know who's in the room. You know, normally we're all together, and so it's hard when we're not in space together. So I'd love to know who's all here, what programs you come from, why you chose this training. Type it in the chat. Summer, I see you, Summer. Some little eyes peeking out. All right. So for today, you know, this is all the working out the kinks, the getting to know each other a little bit piece, you know, thinking about why we're taking a native focused 40-hour training. We're going to examine our readiness. Some people have been doing advocacy as a paid position for decades. Some have been doing it for a lifetime within their own families and their communities. Some are super new to it. We're all pieces of the puzzle that come together to help the people, right? To change the conditions that make sexual assault and sexual violence happening in our communities possible, right? And we're all have important roles wherever we're coming in from it. Okay? Thinking about like what are the root causes of sexual violence in Indian country. So we're going to dig into some of the federal policies, some of the systemic impacts. We're going to talk about racism and sexism and homophobia and all the isms and tactics that make sexual violence happen in the first place, right? We're going to be linking the role of advocacy to activism. So, you know, activism isn't always going out with a picket sign. It isn't always, you know, there's many different kinds of activism, and our activism is going to show up in many different ways. And what we're trying to make the links is that as advocates, we're going to be standing in biased support of somebody who has experienced sexual violence. And we're going to do everything possible to remove barriers to create access to resources and people and things and change community dynamics so we feel supported and safe and loved in our communities, in our families, in the world. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. Okay. So there is a link that I have. So, you know, obviously MIWSAC, the Minnesota Indian Women Sexual Assault Coalition, we're based in Minnesota, but, you know, every state is going to have their own legislation written into their books. Hello, may we test our microphone for Deb Smith? Yeah, for sure. Jump on, Deb. There should, in that bar at the bottom or wherever it is on your screen, there's a mute button. It's like a little microphone. And if you click on that, you should be able to unmute yourself. I hear something.
Hang on just a second. We're trying to figure this out.
Something.
I'm trying to help us right now. Can I help us? Okay, I'm sorry. We're having a few issues, and can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to unmute it, and I'm so sorry to mess up the meeting.
Oh no, hey man, we're in this together. It's awesome.
All right. So she's on, and our when you go into your rooms, are you going to do breakouts again?
Maybe.
Okay. All right.
We won't do it today.
All right. Thank you so very much. Good luck.
There we go. Awesome. As we learn our technology. So let me see if it's in the next slide. Yeah. So if one of the moderators, I'm not sure who, if you can get that link into the chat, that would be awesome. So see that at the bottom, there's a link for the state statutes, because I know we're coming in from all over the country, including Hawaii, and you'll be able to scroll through that information in that link and find the statute in your state that applies to advocates. And so, what if I can back up? So the thing about the statute is it defines by law what protections we have as advocates. And so if you, when we're talking with somebody who has experienced sexual assault, that information is considered privileged information. So what they tell you is confidential with you. You can't break that confidentiality with that person, right? But there's also some rules that apply in order for that confidentiality or that privileged communication to be intact. So you have to be working in a rape crisis, kind of like a direct service environment, right? You would have to have had this 40-hour training, and you just have to be clear on what the rules are at your organization. Okay. Oh yeah, Rebecca dropped it in. And it might be, you know, a little bit different in your state, but it's basically going to be the same. It just protects you from having to testify in court against the person that you're working with, okay? Because, you know, if somebody has experienced sexual assault and they're telling you details, you don't want that information to be, you know, for them to subpoena you and you have to go and testify against that person in the courtroom. So make sure that you know your statute in your state, or your tribe might have additional statutes as well. So make sure that you get a hold of those and have a clear understanding of them, okay? And why do we have a Native focus training or a Native specific training? And, you know, there's a million different stats out there. I have a personal feeling about statistics. You know, statistics are based on information that is given freely. And I don't know about you, but in my experience, we don't always give out that information freely. I have experienced sexual violence, but I actually have multiple perpetrators, and I have not reported all of my perpetrations, right? So even the statistic on me alone is inaccurate. So statistics are one of those things that we need when we're trying to share information, when we're trying to teach others about the impact of sexual violence in our community, but they're also not always accurate. So we always take our stats with a grain of salt, right? What we do know, according to the CDC's most recent research, is that 55% of us, so if you lined up 100 Native people on a line, 55 of us have experienced sexual violence, right? Some form of it throughout their lifetime. You know, there's going to be all different kinds of statistics based on gender, based on sexual orientation, you know. And so what we know about sexual assault is that there's many layers of oppression and many reasons that we are targeted for sexual assault, right? But that's a super high number if you think about, you know, 1 in 3 Native women, 1 in 4 Native men. It's just too high. 1 is too many, right? And so when the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition got together, they realized there was a huge gap in the 40 hours that were being offered out there in the world. A lot of times there'll be a few pages, you know, a few PowerPoints or a few bullet points that were specific to Indian country, but there just wasn't enough information out there. And so we gathered some experts in the field, this was a few years ago, and said, let's write something that we see every day in our community. Let's talk about that. And so this particular 40-hour parallels the state 40 hours. So all of the components that's in the state curriculum is going to be in here, but we're just being a little bit more specific about what happens in our own communities, right? And some of the things that are unique to us. You know, not everybody has been placed in boarding schools or put on reservations or had millions of dollars allocated to wipe us off the face of the earth, right? And so, of course, others have experienced that too, but we just want to be really explicit about naming some of the things that are unique to Indian country. And even the term Indian country is a name that is used in the federal policies, right? So it is it's a political relationship, right? We are sovereign nations and have inherent rights to govern ourselves. And the struggle is ongoing to be sovereign nations who govern ourselves, right? And so naming that in this space is going to be really important. Okay, we talked about that. We talked about all this. So advocacy, it's more than, it's obviously going to be working with, you know, a person who's been sexually assaulted, right? Working with that one person, or sometimes we'll be working with multiple people. But generally what we try to think about is advocacy is like a way of being in the world. It intersects with every single thing that we do, right? It's grassroots in nature. So even though you may have a job description and have a certain system built into your workplace with what your job is, we're asking us to think about advocacy as a way of being, as a way of thinking outside. It's not so cheesy to say outside the box, but really like how creative can we be to get the resources to the people that need them? How creative can we be in removing barriers that are impacting survivors? How creative can we be in addressing the systems that keep showing up as barriers to the people? And that's really what our role is, right? So it's more than just one person at a time. It's really about digging in to those institutions that make it harder for us, right? It's digging into the social constructs that we have in our communities, right? My advocacy even comes with, you know, talking with my brother if he's telling some kind of, you know, sexualized joke. It's my job as an advocate and as his relative to interrupt that, right? That's that social change I'm talking about, that even in our own families and communities, we have to interrupt things in our advocacy. Okay. There's no degree required to be an advocate. You know, I often thought so many times, I wish you could go to college and get a degree in this, but there's, you know, you can get a degree in social work, in mental health, all these different modalities. But to be an advocate, there's, you know, there's really, we can all be advocates, and we all are advocates to some degree, right? Even if you go to the drive-through and they mess up your order, and you go circle back around and you say, well, I did not want cheese on this, but you put cheese on it. That is advocacy, right? And also, it just comes in many forms. That's what I'm saying, is that, you know, when something happens at school with your kids and you go into the school to talk to the teacher or the principal, that is advocacy, right? So but we're asking to think about changing the conditions also at the same time, right? So using the cheese on the sandwich at the drive-through is a very weak example, but you could technically take it to the next level and go talk to the manager and talk about the training that the staff is receiving, right? So that's what I'm kind of getting at, is like, what is that next level of the work to remove barriers to improve conditions generally, okay? There's no power differential in advocacy. So, you know, our institutions, so for example, if you want to jump on the mic or type it in the chat, what is a person who goes shopping? What do we call people who go shopping? Type it in the chat. Customers. What do we call a person who goes to school? Students, right? What do we call a person who goes to the hospital? Right. Okay, so the institutions have language built in to the structure of how they operate, right? So when you are providing advocacy to somebody, what we want to do is level the relationship out, because we are experts in our own lives, right? So just because I have experienced sexual assault, it doesn't mean that I'm not a whole being and that I'm not the expert in my life. I may be traumatized, in pain, angry, hurt, betrayed, struggling with substance abuse, all the things that come with experiencing a sexual assault. But I still know deep in my heart, in my soul, what is best for my life at any given time. So our role as advocates is to level that out. And when we think about the person we're working with, you know, they're not less than us, right? They're the same. And so how do we keep that relationship level with one another? And one of the ways that we think about that is have them tell you who they are, right? So try to think about moving away from the word client, right? Like if you think about a client, there is something in our brain defines that word client in a very particular way, right? And so if we remove the word client and call them a person or by their name or however they identify, that just that one word alone levels the relationship out a little bit, right? When you're talking with them and building a relationship with them, to remind them that they're the expert in their own lives. Does that make sense? Any way that we can level it out, level that relationship out. Yeah, the balance, right? You are going to have access to resources within your program, right? That's why they're coming to the program, to seek advocacy, to have somebody listen to their truth, to be in their corner, to help them get some kind of resource. Maybe they want to report to the police, maybe they don't. Maybe they want to go do the forensic exam, maybe they don't, right? And so our role is to kind of help them navigate the many paths they can take while making sure that they are the expert in their own lives and that they're making informed decisions about what their options are. Okay. Okay. So another thing I would remind us too is that words are super powerful, right? Like that's what I was talking about with that, the word client, like as opposed to calling them by their name, you know, or a survivor that I'm working with or something like that, right? And so words all along the way, you're going to hear words and we all define them differently, right? So what I'm thinking about is like if some words are just like, I don't really know what you're talking about with that. Ask the question. Okay, we really want you to just ask the question. So our advocacy is standing in biased support of the survivor. Okay, so working with them, listening to them, believing everything that they say. It's not our job to police whether they're telling the truth or not, right? It's really important for us to listen and believe unequivocally. Because to what end would it be for us to question what they're telling us? This is their experience and they're sharing it with you in this particular way. And our role as an advocate is to support that, right? Because who knows why that person is choosing to present the information in that particular way at that particular time, right? We're the expert in our own lives and we're going to be testing the waters when we're reaching out to people, right? We're going to see how that person responds, both in their face, in their tone, in their body language, what's on the wall in the room, you know, how are the chairs set up? When you have experienced sexual violence, you're tuned into all those things, right? And especially for Native folks, when we have experienced many levels and layers of violence, we're super, super in tune with all the nuances around us, right? And so our job is to always believe them and stand in biased support of what they're bringing to you, okay? Navigating the systems, right? We'll be talking throughout the month about many different institutions and systems that a survivor may encounter. Like I said, that just telling somebody depends on who you tell. Sometimes it's a friend or a family or your sister or your mom or a counselor at school or a coworker. But it could be calling 911. It could be going to the advocate program. It could be going up to social services, right? All different ways. There's many different entry points to when we tell somebody about our sexual assault. And so once they do, they're going to be entering into a whole bunch of systems. Police, the hospital, maybe some mental health services. It could be substance abuse programs. It could be ICWA, you know, trying to keep your kids. I mean, there's just so many systems that they may end up navigating, even how to find a place to stay, you know, maybe how to get a ride to work or how they sign up for WIC, right? There's many different things that are going to show up in a survivor's life once they decide to disclose their assault. And so it's in our best interest as advocates to know what those systems are and understand how those systems are set up and what they're really intended to do, right? And we'll talk much more in depth about all of these systems as we go throughout the month. So our advocacy is always survivor-centered, victim survivor-centered, right? And we're always working to change how the systems respond. And we're always working to change how community responds, because we also know, especially in Indian country, everybody knows everybody, right? Half the time we're related, right? Many times our families are so close knit that our perpetrator may be really in close proximity at any given time, right? So working how our families and communities respond to it too is equally as important as an advocate, yeah? And always be thinking about how we're gonna end it. So not just dealing with one one person's experience at a time, but how do we end it? What does it look like to change the conditions in our country and our world that makes sexual violence possible? You know, where do our ideas come from that we can use the act of sex as violence, as a tool of violence? Where does that come from? Right? We'll be digging into that a little bit. Okay, this is a little examining our readiness exercise. So everybody take a breath and let it out. Okay. So normally we're in a room together and we have some posters on the wall. And so over here on this side, it will be, the poster says strongly agree. And then on the other side, it's going to say strongly disagree. And then in the middle, it's going to say somewhere in the middle. So the idea of this exercise is, how do you feel about it? And there's no right or wrong answer. It just is what it is for you, right? And we'll just kind of go from there. And you can just type it in the chat. I'll probably ask for, a couple people to jump on the microphone and share, why they feel that way. And we'll just go from there. Okay? Okay. What about this question? When a woman says no, she means maybe. Do you agree with that? Are you somewhere in the middle, or do you disagree? When a woman says no, she means maybe. Disagrees, lots of strongly disagrees. Strongly disagree. Okay. When a woman says no, she means maybe. Okay. All right. How about this one? Anything that adults consent to do together is okay. Anything that adults consent to do together is okay. Do you agree? Are you in the middle, or do you disagree? Anything that adults consent to do together are okay. Okay. Would somebody like to jump on the microphone and say why they agree that anything that adults consent to do together is okay?
This is Rebecca. I really liked what Louise said in the middle, because consent may be coerced, right? It can be. So consent is consent, but that's not black and white. There's a lot of gray in that middle. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay, is there anybody who disagrees? Anybody who disagrees that adults that consent to do together is okay? Jump on the mic and tell us why you disagree with that. Does anybody disagree that adults who consent?
I think that sometimes that, especially with influence, that two adults can consent to doing very negative things, just with possibility.
Okay, so sometimes adults can consent to do things that are not healthy or not legal, right? Okay.
And this is Rebecca. I just want to chime in real super quick. So I come from a heavy sex trafficking lens, and trafficking and sex work, there's the debate. I get that. However, for sex trafficking survivors, they're in this lay of the land where forced consent is 5 hours ago. Forceful, all the game that's played on sex trafficking. So consent looks like consent unless you have a pimp that's threatening your children, your animals, your life, your food, your shelter. So consent can look different from 5 hours ago when you were threatened. So that's like a piece of the pie. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, how about this one? You must forgive to heal. In order for us to heal from sexual assault, we must forgive. Do you agree with that? Are you somewhere in the middle? Do you disagree? In order to heal, you must forgive. Is somebody who agrees with that? Would you like to jump on the mic and talk about why you agree that to heal, you must forgive? It's like there's no right or wrong here, just a discussion. Or does somebody in the middle want to jump on? Are you in the middle on it and want to jump on?
This is Rebecca. I'm just filling the airwaves again, just trying to chime in that I think the middle is a good answer because there's internal forgiveness and external, and those are different beasts, right? In the cage. So I think it can be in the middle. You can forgive internally, but not externally, and vice versa. I don't know. Anyone else?
Yeah, who disagrees with that? If you disagree, please share why you disagree that in order to heal, you have to forgive.
I don't disagree or agree. I just think that because it's so personal, like for me, I wouldn't want to see like, this is what you have to do. Like you do A and B and then you get C. It's like, it's up to you. And that's sort of like the beauty in it is you're figuring out what works for you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leslie. I kind of want to just chime in here. I think forgiveness, I was in the middle on this one because I think forgiveness is more for myself. Whether or not the other person knows that I forgive them is not my responsibility. I think the forgiveness for me to heal, for me, needs to happen because I need to feel okay with that for myself, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, how about this one? Victims who recant are lying. So recant means that they say that they have been assaulted, but then later they take it back and say, no, I didn't really say that. I'm just kidding, or I was lying. Victims who recant are lying. Do you agree? Are you in the middle? Do you disagree? Victims who recant are lying. Okay, did I see any agrees? Is anybody who agrees with that victims who recant are lying? Would you like to jump on the microphone and share? Or somewhere in the middle? Anybody who's somewhere in the middle on that one? So there's no right or wrong here. We're all entitled to our beliefs on and thoughts on things.
Can I chime in? Sacred Heart advocates recant to protect family. Now that's real. That's all the intersections and complications, right? Thank you for that.
All right, somebody who disagrees, would you be willing to share why you disagree with that? Victims who recant are lying.
Hi, I'm Anna. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Okay. I think that I guess it's somewhat in the middle, just depending on the situation. But also, I also disagree because sometimes when people have trauma, like it's like your brain wants you, it blocks out certain parts of things and memories to protect yourself. And sometimes people with trauma, like this happened, and then they second guess themselves, like, did this really happen? Am I just thinking this happened, when in actuality it did happen? But the way our brain works to protect ourselves, and just having to accept that something like that has happened, is hard and challenging. And it's like, I don't know if that made sense, but yeah, okay. Thank you.
So much, Ann. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. How about this one? Prostitution is a choice. Do you agree with that? Are you somewhere in the middle, or do you disagree? Prostitution is a choice. Agree, in the middle, disagree. Prostitution is a choice. And welcome, Nicole.
Thank you.
Somebody who agrees that prostitution is a choice, would you be willing to jump on the microphone and share? Or somewhere in the middle? Don't be shy, come on.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in the middle because voluntary sex work is a thing and has been a thing in many different cultures for such a huge part of history. But you also have to consider why people are doing that voluntarily, you know, if it's to feed their kids or to feed themselves or to keep the lights on or whatever, you know, is it really voluntary? And then also we've discussed a little about sex trafficking, which is not voluntary. So I mean, it's just too complex to say one way or the other.
Thank you, thank you.
Do you really think that anything, particularly a demographic that specifically affects women, that anything that we say or do is actually a free choice or actual free will after being raised under a patriarchy that is this malicious and violent?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
And this is Rebecca. That is a great conversation starter. So I think it's on the 26th. We're going to do sex trafficking and prostitution module where we can really dig in those conversations. So yeah, I just want to say that too.
Afton, that might be a good time for you to drop I forgot to even mention this earlier. Afton is going to drop the agenda and this first module in the chat, the first PowerPoint module in the chat, module 0. That way you'll have it on your end. Okay, and the agenda for the month. Okay. All right, so that's a juicy conversation, right? That we'll have more conversations about it. How about this one? Pornography is harmless. Pornography is harmless. Do you agree? Are you somewhere in the middle? Or do you disagree? Pornography is harmless. You might have to scroll back a little bit to get Afton's documents that she dropped in there.
I'll send it out after the questions.
Okay, is there any people who agree that prostitution is harmless that would like to share? Somewhere in the middle?
I feel like it can be either way. It generally just, I mean, you can be addicted to anything. You can be addicted to painkillers, you can be addicted to sex, you can be addicted to, you know, a person. So, I mean, it really just depends on how much and how often you're seeking this sexual stimulation. Sex is not porn. No, but porn is the act of sex. Therefore, it's still in the realm of being an
addiction towards the sexual experience. So
Respectfully and wholeheartedly disagree with you just because of the chemicals that it releases in our brains. It is totally different. Sex is not porn, but it is where most of our kids are getting their sexual education from, and it is an epidemic in this country.
Kayla, can you say that a little bit louder, please?
Yeah, I said just based on the studies that have been done and the way that it affects your brain, that's why I say that sex is not porn. And it is not visually capturing what the actual like act of sex is. Porn is not that. It is advertising, it is male domination. It is like if you look into the psychology behind and the studies that have been done, it is the reason I said that sex is not porn is because it is, you know, the place where most of our kids are getting the baseline of their sexual education in this country. And it is a massive indicator of the sexual violence, usually like in a country, or the way that they look at like specific groups as being like teen was the number one searched term like for the last year and the year before that. If you look into any of the psychology studies that have been done behind why that is, it's like a mass epidemic in this country. That's the only reason I said that like sex and porn are not the same thing, is because of the way that it's affecting our kids' brains and stuff. Just in my line of work, and you know, going into like I'm raising a 4-year-old little white boy, and trying to get the digs of patriarchy out of him. The statistic that I read lately was that the first time our kids are even exposed to porn, not sex, but porn, is between the ages of like 3 and 9 years old. So I would definitely say that like sex and porn are not synonymous. And that's a lot of what colludes to like a nation becoming violent against its women or violence against its sexual minorities, is because of the way that they're portrayed within pornography.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, one more question. So what about this one? It is a parent's responsibility to show kids about sex. It is a parent's responsibility to show kids about sex. Do you agree with that? Are you somewhere in the middle? Or do you disagree? It's a parent's responsibility to show kids about sex. Okay, somebody who agrees with that, would be willing to jump on the mic? It's a parent's responsibility to show kids about sex. Or
I
some,
agree. I'm sorry. Hi, Leslie again. I agree because I would rather have that education come from myself as a parent, because I know that they're going to get misinformation from everywhere else. And so I would like them to have as much tools necessary for them to make healthier decisions.
Great. Thank you. Sacred Hearts Advocates wrote show or tell in the chat. And I think that is that kind of sums up what I think this whole conversation is about, is words are extraordinarily powerful, right? And especially when we're talking about English words, like every single one of us in this room have a language that is indigenous to us in addition to the English language, right? So for some, English is their first language. Sometimes it's their second or third or more language. But our indigenous languages have a completely different meaning to some words, right? So for example, one of our words for love in Anishinaabe is Joanum. But Joanum isn't to love somebody in the way that the English word thinks of it. Joanum is when the suckerfish saw the Anishinaabe people starving in the winter, and they said, man, we got to take care of those people. They're starving to death. So those suckerfish sent a dream to the people to say, if you cut a hole in the ice, you can catch us so you can eat. That's Joanum. So the power of one word means all of that the suckerfish saw the Anishinaabe people starving and took pity on us and gave us food in the winter through a dream, right? So in our advocacy, when we're thinking about what the person who's coming to you, the words that they're saying, our role is to build a relationship, to build trust, to build understanding, to try to determine, you know, what's the best way to give this person the resources that they need to heal and move through a sexual assault, or many instances or many generations of sexual violence that they've experienced, right? That's what advocacy is. So when we're thinking about examining our readiness, what you heard today, and this is just a couple of people sharing their thoughts out loud, we each have our own, what brought us to who we are and how we are today, how we were raised, who raised us, what religion or no religion, what support that we had or no support, what did we disclose and somebody believed us? Did we disclose and somebody called us a liar and threw us out of our village, right? We come from a long spectrum of experiences and access to information and trust and knowledge. So in our advocacy, we want to come fresh every single time to every single person that we're working with, right? We want to check our own biases, the own things that we strongly believe, or the things that we don't know much about, but it would be better if we learned a little bit more about it, right? There's some other questions in here that, you know, we don't need to go into, but it's something to think about. You know, right now, something on the table in the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade was reversed, right? So our access to legal abortion is gone. So people are going to have beliefs around that based on how they were raised and who raised them, right? So our role every single time is to start fresh with that person and stand in bias support of them in that moment, okay? Some programs don't have a lot of staff, so they don't have another person that you can refer them to. But what can you do in your organization that your program, so you can get the support that you need to provide the best advocacy possible for this person, right? Who do you have to reach out to and have it set up? So like if there's something that they present to you, you know, for example, abortion or prostitution or whatever the thing is, if you can't provide your most honest, best bias support advocacy to that person, you want to get somebody else to step in those spaces. Because the worst thing that we can do is shut somebody down when they come to you for help or resources or insight or guidance or access. We just want to check our own biases to be open and loving and to be trusted, right? Okay. So I love those questions. There's no right or wrong. We're all human. And I think I just said all the stuff that's written here. Do your own self-care where you're, you know, I hope everybody has something with water. Like if you can all just take a drink of water right now, or your tea or coffee or juice, whatever you have, just take a drink of it, take a breath, let it out. Because sometimes it can feel like an attack on our beliefs and values. Sometimes it can be like, oh my gosh, I finally found my people, like people finally get it. It can be all those things at any given time when we're talking about this kind of stuff. Okay. I got to drink a little water. All right. So no right or wrong answers, but be thinking about that, how to check your biases at the door, stand in bias supported survivor. So let's take a break, get some food and snacks, walk around, go outside maybe a couple minutes, or definitely go by a window and let our grandfather's son look at your cheeks, let him see your face, and then come back at, we'll come back at 2:50, 2:50. Give ourselves a good 15-minute break. Is that okay with you, Nicole?
Yep, that works for me.
All right. All right, we'll see everybody in 15 minutes, okay? Pause this recording. Recording. All right, as we make our way back from break, you can, one of the polls is what your favorite music is, and you can just drop it in the chat because we're going to end the poll now. Share the results. Soul, Hawaiian music. So I think country won in this group. 13 of us. 12 for powwow, 11 for ceremony, 13 for rock, 12 for pop, 11 for variety. Awesome. Right. Well, welcome, Nicole Matthews. Maybe you can tell us who you are, and you'll be doing module 1 with us today, the fundamentals of advocacy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bonjour, everyone. Mani du Vaneshi Queen, Dijanakas, Migasin Dame, Gawa Babagana Kag in Dunjaba. My English name is Nicole Matthews, and my Indian name is Spirit Bird Woman. I'm Eagle Clan, and my people are from the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, which is where Christine lives. Although my family lives on the Leech Lake Reservation. And I am the executive director here at MIWSAC. I've been here for over 20 years, and yeah, I'm excited to see so many people on here today. It's nice to see you all. And I will share my screen. Did you all go over that slide of the white supremacy culture, Christine? Yes, okay, so I can just start on the. Alrighty, I've been having issues with my internet today, so so hopefully if it gets glitchy, Christine, you'll have to let me know. It's not letting me share my screen. Let me see. I can't. Can you do the Zoom? It won't let me share my PowerPoint. It says I have to get out of Zoom and then change my preferences and come back.
All right, give me a second.
Okay.
We're close. Okay. What do you see?
It says, what is your favorite kind of music?
Awesome. Okay, just tell me when to click.
All right, you can click. There we go. So we're just going to start. This is our module 1, just to give us some groundwork, foundations on sexual assault advocacy. And I'm glad that you all are so, that you all have already started in conversation, and that seems like you are not a super quiet bunch. So I'm excited for a lively conversation. And just to start, this is a quote from Tanikia Williams from Standing Rock. Our women are tired. They're tired of getting raped. They're tired of getting beaten. They're tired of getting their hopes stepped on anytime they try to do something about it. And that's from an article, it's been some years now that came out, Tiny Little Laws. It was in Harper's Magazine. You can go to the next slide. So the goal of this module is just, like I said, to introduce you all to the roles and responsibilities of sexual assault advocacy, looking at it from a cultural lens. The objectives: internalize the beliefs and actions of advocacy, looking at the cultural context into providing advocacy. We'll look at the differences between an advocacy model and a case management model. And then we'll discuss the roles and responsibilities of advocacy as it relates to social and systems change. Okay. All right, so when we look at some of our historical foundations of advocacy, we know, that this is not new. The notion or the idea of advocacy is not new in our communities. We've always had circles of support. Oh, I think someone is not, there we go. So circles of support is not a new concept in our tribal communities. We've had that forever, right? In our traditions, we look at each other as relatives, and not just relatives in the human sense, but we look at relatives in regards to plants and to our animal relatives and to all of creation and the reciprocity that goes along with that. And when we look at the people in our village, our clan, our pueblo, like every relative had a specific role in that community, and each role was valued, right? No one role was more important or better or more valued than the other. We just all had different roles. Many of our communities were also matrilineal societies, right? Where women, the aunties, grandmas, the sisters, they were the primary decision makers. They interceded in times of conflict. They are the ones that took care of their villages and maintained that balance. And I think, we have seen with the first contact and through colonization, how there's writings about what that looked like, because it was not like that in Europe. And so it was very different when they seen what our communities look like. Okay. So this is Sarah Winnemucca. She is a Paiute woman. And she was doing advocacy many, many years ago in her community, and some of the first writings, documented writings about that. And one of her quotes is that, "My cousin said there were very bad men there. Sometimes they would throw a rope over our women and do fearful things to them. Oh, my poor cousin," she said, "my heart aches for you, for I am afraid they will do something fearful to you. They do not care for anything. They do most terrible, outrageous things to our women." Good. And if there's, I'll try to watch the chat too, but if there's comments or questions, feel free to jump in there.
Nicole, I did want to add about Sarah Winnemucca. One of the reasons that we wanted to talk about Sarah is that, she's a Paiute woman who went off to get a college education, right? So she went out into the mainstream education system and then came back and was trying to work on the laws in her village. And so people were kind of mad at her for that, almost like you're being a traitor to our people when you go get this Western education, in your language, in your concepts, and your ideas. They're not how we function. We function like this in a circle where everyone is valued and has a purpose in place, but you're coming with these rules and decisions in a hierarchy, right? So they were kind of mad at her for that. But her advocacy, she had to do both. She had to go advocate on behalf of our people in that system, in that institution, and she had to come back and kind of try to educate our own people that levels of violence like that are unacceptable, that as sovereign nations, we can create laws within our own communities. We can do that level of work in our own communities. So we just kind of want to honor Sarah in that our work as advocates is really complicated. Our people are going to be mad at us when we're calling out a perpetrator in our own village, right? People want us to not say those things out loud, but our role is to go ahead and be fearless and try to change those conditions within our own communities too. Okay, MIWSAC.
Yeah, thank you. Please feel free to jump in at any time. You know, you could probably do all these modules in your sleep. And I certainly don't present on them as often as you. So when we look at advocacy and personal sovereignty, right? Like sovereignty is a word that we use a lot, and sometimes we don't think about what does that mean, and what does personal sovereignty, what does body sovereignty mean? Certainly, you know, that concept and that notion has been in our hearts and minds a lot lately with the Roe v. Wade decision, right? Thinking about body sovereignty. And really thinking about working with and on behalf of victims or survivors to help regain personal sovereignty and control over their bodies, their choices, and their lives. And that is a great quote, that being a sovereign person means being able to choose one's own actions and reactions without being forced to by another person. And I think it's really important when we think about advocacy and we think about the choices that have been taken from victims and survivors to help them to be able to regain that sense of control over their own decisions, right? Because we're not there to make the decisions for them. We're there to present choices and options and to allow them to make those decisions and those choices for themselves. Even if we think what they're doing is the wrong decision, it's not for us to say. Okay. Principles of advocacy, I think these are really awesome, and they've been around for decades and still are so incredibly relevant to the work that we do, to the work in advocacy. When we're working with victims, we want to create an image of hope, making sure that they feel some sense of hope at a time when maybe they're feeling very hopeless, right? And again, going back to that honoring our Native sovereignty and honoring their personal and body sovereignty. And along with that is to promote self-determination, which goes along with the sovereignty, right? And the determination to make their own choices. And then looking at relationships and to reestablish their humanness. I think sexual violence strips so much from our spirit, and to do what we can, whether it's through ceremony, whether it's through just support and talking, whether it's through sitting with someone, whether it's through walking into nature and letting someone just scream out into somewhere where they can just be loud and get it out, whatever it is to help their own personal relationship with themselves to reestablish that humanness and to reclaim and establish the status of sacred. Certainly when you're impacted by sexual violence, you're certainly not feeling very sacred, right? And someone has taken something, and used sex as a weapon, as a tool against you that caused a lot of harm and trauma. And so helping to reclaim that status of sacredness and maybe to remind that survivor. Also assisting in getting their basic needs met, because certainly there are things, if it is a survivor that you are meeting at the hospital after a sexual assault or to be with them during a sexual assault exam, they may need clothing to go home in. They may need, their doors, the locks to their doors changed. They may need, some real basic needs met. They may need rent money. They may need food. They may need, a variety of things. So helping them to get their basic needs met as well. And then this one I think is really critical around eliminating compliancy, which, is a big word, but really to not turn away from the epidemic of violence. Like as an advocate, how are we always working to challenge those systems so that we are not compliant? So we don't just accept it as just something that happens in our society, something that we're just going to be dealing with forever, right? Because as an advocate, our ultimate goal is to work ourselves out of a job, right? To not be doing this work forever, that we want the violence to end. And that's where this, eliminating compliancy comes in. Any other thoughts, Christine, or anybody else? Okay. We want to acknowledge the struggle for human rights that begins with protecting our Indigenous people. We are the first people of this land. And so when we create systems and responses that honor and uphold the sacredness of our people, that protects our Indigenous people, then we have good systems and responses for all people. And I think we need to remember that, and we need to remember the importance of that, whether we are working in tribal communities or in an urban area with, a large urban Indian population, or wherever we're working, right, with whatever community we're working. Mobilizing our communities and changing our community perceptions. It's important if we're going back to, eliminating compliancy, if we're really trying to do systems change, that means we got to work in community. We need to be, the Sarawinamukka, we need to be doing that work in community. And sometimes we will get pushback. We will get called names. We will get challenged. We will, get challenged by our own communities. But we need to keep pushing. We need to keep mobilizing our communities, because that's how we create change. And not just within our communities, right? We start here and then we go broader and out as well. We need to promote a social justice and a social change response. Again, always looking at what are we doing to create a bigger impact? What are we doing to truly change the systems and the responses so that the violence is not, it does not continue to happen? And with that, how do we honor our tribal legacy and incorporate traditional ways? One of the things that oftentimes happens is that we think, sometimes we have programs that are very similar to mainstream programs, right? Like we've adopted many practices, many protocols. And I think it's really important to make sure that we do these, that when we are looking at programming, when we're looking at advocacy, it's through our tribal lens. It's with our tribal practices, with our traditional ways. We look at what are our values, so that we are doing it from our perspective, because that's what's going to work the best in our communities for our people.
Nicole, I'll just add really quick, like Andrea posted a little while ago, that even if they want you to make the decision for them, crucial to healing process, that they are supported and not told what to do. I mean, that's really what that tribal worldview is that, we're the experts in our own lives. And even though it can feel like we're out of practice making decisions, if you're living in a violent environment, it can feel like when you've had all your choices taken from you, what does it look like to help restore those choices? So even if it's a small choice, like what are you going to have for breakfast today? That's a choice you may not have had. And so that relative to relative worldview is really powerful. And that's restoring that sense of sovereignty and autonomy and that social change piece, right? So yeah, I just wanted to add that. Rich.
Absolutely. And there's something about like, and sometimes this may seem small, but it feels good when you know someone's trusting you with even small decisions, right? When you've had something so big taken from you, or, such a major trauma, it feels good to know that someone is trusts you enough to make those decisions when you've had, some decisions that were taken from you. I think it's really critical to protect confidentiality and privacy, and especially in our communities. Our communities are small. Whether you're in an urban Indian population or you're in a tribal community, our communities are small, and everybody knows everybody's business, right? And you may go into the advocacy program and it might be someone you went to high school with, someone who you're related to, someone who the perpetrator is related to. And so, for a victim, that's really scary. And so we need to make sure that we are always taking extra precautions to protect confidentiality and privacy so that victims can feel safe coming to us. And along with that, we need to make sure that all of that lives in our policies, in our protocols, in our practices, because we want to make sure that it's I hate this term, but it's institutionalized in our programs, right? Because if we leave tomorrow, so we have this great rapport with the community, victims feel really safe to come to us, and then we leave tomorrow and we haven't put it in policy, and all of that changes because now you have someone else that's coming in who has different views, who has different practices, who may not respond the same way. So we want to make sure that all of those values, all of those practices also live in our policies and in our protocols. Thoughts, questions? Okay. So looking at the beliefs that guide our work, and looking at the many forms of oppression as really the root, right? So if we look at it as this tree and roots that really go deep, right? We're looking at racism, we're looking at sexism, we're looking at classism and ageism and all of the things, right? Heterosexism. And so I think it's really important that we have an understanding about what these are and that we understand how they impact victims, right? And so we look at racism and the impact that colonization has had in our communities. And you look at maybe the thoughts about connected to sexual violence. Years ago, when we were doing our research on victims of with women who had Native women who had experienced prostitution and trafficking, we learned a lot about the connection to racism with the women that we interviewed. And one of the sex buyers said, I thought we killed all of you. And so if there's a belief that we don't even exist anymore, it's much easier to cause harm to people that don't even exist. If we don't even see them, right? In addition to the names, that they were called, and including, wanting to role play being Pocahontas and John Smith, right? And so looking at racism and the roots of racism, which are really connected in our communities to colonization and the impact of colonization. And so I think, with us, I think it's a little more complicated than just racism, right? Because our communities have a sovereign to sovereign relationship with the government. So there's a different relationship there. And when we look at sexism, right, we talk about how we had matrilineal, matriarchal societies, right? But with the impact of colonization, that has shifted for many of our communities. And maybe, some are still, there's many that are still matrilineal, but we have shifted in some of our practices and some of our, the ways we have assimilated and had to live in two worlds where we were really impacted by patriarchy and all that has done to knock women down, right? And again, going back to the decision, the Roe v. Wade decision that will really impact women across this country to have safe access to abortions. I think we're in Minnesota, we're lucky at the time, right? We have safe access, but that can change. That can change with the next election. So, and then looking at how classism intersects. And so we look at you know, we think we don't have such a class delineation, and yet we criminalize poverty. You know, so many people are incarcerated because of poverty crimes. And, you know, so many people get ahead because of, you know, their access to money. And if we look at many people who've committed crimes, sexual violence, we've seen many of them who have not been held accountable because they had access to money.
Well, can I add just something I was thinking about in terms of classism? It even shows up in our advocacy unintended, right? In some ways, like the idea about healing from sexual violence is that you heal yourself, right? Like you get what you need, you work through your trauma, you pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you move on with your life, you know, with support, and you get your life together. But in Indian country, that is so often, that's such a small piece. Like my individual healing is such a small piece of the big puzzle, right? And that's the way that classism can show up in weird ways. It's not just about go get some therapy and move on, right? Like this is deep consequences within our whole many generations of our families. And so just be keeping that in mind, that it shows up in ways that we don't expect either.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then if we look at ageism, right? And we really place value, if we look at capitalism, and ageism is really connected, right? Because we really place value on people that are a working class. And so people that are minors have less value in a capitalist society, right? People who are elders and who are starting to retire have less value in the larger society, right? In our societies, in our communities, elders are respected. But even with that, sometimes we forget, right? And sometimes our kids don't know and haven't been taught the importance of elders, and maybe don't go to our elders and ask for that wisdom. And so looking at, you know, how some people are more vulnerable. And then when we look at heterosexism and homophobia, we have certainly seen sexual violence committed against you know, people who identify as gay or lesbian or bisexual or trans as a way to shame them, to really have power over them, to really cause harm because of their sexual orientation, because of their expression of gender, because of who they are, right? And so looking at you know, the very high rates of sexual violence against our LGBTQ two-spirit population. And then looking at ableism, I think there's, you know, I think sometimes there's a notion that if you have, excuse me, if you have a disability, some people think they're asexual, right? That they don't, you know, if they're in a wheelchair and if they're have whatever cognitive, people think they're asexual altogether. And because they are more vulnerable, because they may have a personal care attendant who is with them all the time. We have seen personal care attendants taking advantage of that person. And who are they going to go to if that's their person who's caring for them? And then autism, and I haven't had as much, so maybe Christine, you could talk about that a little bit. I haven't had as much experience with.
I'll probably just add, like, you know, with ableism and autism, it's kind of the assumption that it's a cultural assumption that somebody who cannot hear or is hard of hearing, or somebody who cannot see or move around, you know, without assistance, that their lives are not full and beautiful just as they are.
Right.
It's just, you know, you see the things on Facebook where the kids get a cochlear implant and they hear for the first time, or you see people with the, what do you call it when you're colorblind and they have glasses that you can see color. And they're really touching and moving, right? Because you see a baby hearing their mom's voice for the first time, and I've cried. And that's beautiful, but we also have to be careful of our assumptions of what a good and beautiful and normal life is, right?
Right.
That's where the isms come in, that if we think that they're somehow worse off than other people, then that's just our assumptions.
That's right. Yeah, thank you for talking. And also that made me think of like, we have an ASL interpreter here, but how many trainings, how many places have we gone where there isn't an interpreter? So where's the access? How does someone have access to the same information and resources that we have? And if we look at our programming too, how are we making sure that we also provide access? All right, and when we look at gender-based violence and the intersections with sexism, you know, statistically, we know that the violence, sexual violence is most often perpetrated against female identified victims, and males or male identified are the primary perpetrators of sexual violence. Sorry, my mouth is not working today. And that does not mean that sexual violence does not happen to all people, and that all genders cannot be perpetrators, right? But statistically, female identified victims are at have higher rates of sexual violence, and males are the primary perpetrators. And then, you know, we cannot end sexual violence without working to end all of these forms of oppression simultaneously, you know, at the same time. So that should always be a part of our work. It's not separate from our work. It's not someone else is going to do this piece and we're just going to focus on sexual violence, because this is what's at the root.
Yeah, it's a culture. It's an umbrella of circumstances that include patriarchy and misogyny and all the things, right? Who has a voice and who doesn't. It's all included in this oppression work.
Sorry. So when we look at victim or survivor centered, we want to make sure that we, you know, as advocates, that we are working outside of other systems, right? And that we are standing with, working with, and revolving around the wants and needs of the victim survivor. Now, I want to say that's a really challenging thing in our tribal communities, because oftentimes many of our programs are located within the systems, right? It may be underneath the tribal government umbrella, in the social services department, underneath the, you know, commissioner of, you know, human services or whatever, however your system is set up. And so it's hard, it can be harder to challenge those systems. But we must remember our role as advocates is to challenge when those systems don't show up appropriately, to the ability that we challenge those systems that are there to respond to victims. And that our program and policies direct the role of advocates, that they're focused solely on the needs of victims, right? Not on what the social services needs or what the tribal government's needs are or what our needs are, but it's focused on the needs of the victims. That we have non-judgmental and sensitive responses. And that's why we have that, the readiness quiz in the beginning. So we can start thinking about what our own beliefs are, because it's important to know what our beliefs are going into providing advocacy. Because if we don't, and someone comes in who is used in pornography, and we have these views about pornography, and we place them on that victim, they may not ever come back. Right, so we want to make sure nobody's coming into this, you know, as a perfect person without a, you know, any sort of held prejudices or biases that you haven't learned from existing in this world and taking in all the stuff that we take in every single day, right? But if we are aware of them and we are working on them, and we can learn to put those aside so that we can be non-judgmental and focus on what the needs of the victims are and put our own needs and our own views aside. And then our program policies also work to mobilize our communities. And then again, that our tribal values guide a victim-centered or woman-centered approach, that we are always looking to make sure that we have those tribal values living and breathing in our documents, in our advocacy, in our policies, in our protocols, in everything we do should be through that tribal lens. Questions or comments? Awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit about an advocacy model versus a case management model. And so on the left, we have an advocacy model where we would talk about the person as the using their name as a victim, a survivor. Oftentimes the language in the case management model is of a client. So we see that with like therapists have clients. We see probably child protection has clients. There's more of a mental health framework to the case management client model. Our advocacy model is a victim or survivor centered. And the case management model is case centered. So it's centered around the specific thing that happened. And you build your treatment and your case plan, right? And it's things that all these steps that the person must do. Whereas in an advocacy model, there is no treatment plan, there is no case plan, right? It's all on the self-identified needs of the survivor. If she says, I want to go to a support group, great. If tomorrow she says, I don't want to go to a support group, great. It is based on what her self-identified needs are. With an advocacy model, the view is that it's an externally imposed trauma, right? It's something that happened to her. It's not something that's wrong with her. Whereas a case management model looks at what is wrong with the person, right? So if you have something that's wrong with them, then it makes sense to have this treatment or case plan to fix it, right? Whereas in our advocacy model, and the framework that we will be talking about through this advocacy training is really about, this is about an externally imposed trauma. Someone else committed, this harm against a victim. They don't need a treatment plan. It is not because of something flawed in them that needs to be fixed by us. We just need to help them work through that trauma with whatever they're asking for. The case management model is, there's a diagnosis, right? So you may have this DSM 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever we're up to by now. Some sort of diagnoses. We don't diagnose victims, right? We're not therapists, we're not diagnosing them, nor should we be diagnosing them, nor should it matter. Also, I think, for an advocacy model, it is a political framework. We are looking to change the systems, to change the responses to sexual violence, to change the world that allows sexual violence to continue to happen, to look at social norms, to look at systems, institutional responses, to look at all the, the things we talked about, all the root causes we talked about in the last slide. So it is a political framework. A case management is non-political. It is a mental health model. And there's bureaucratic hierarchies in the case management model. Whereas in an advocacy model, it's a grassroots model, right? We are working with the survivor. We are not over or above. We don't know any, we're not any better We may have more resources. We may have more knowledge of resources, maybe not. But sometimes when you're going through trauma, it's hard to remember what those resources are. And it's really hard to advocate for yourself. You know, I've certainly been in situations before where I've needed help because, and it's not that I didn't know all the information, it's that when you're going through it, you forget because you're going through a traumatic life experience. In a case management model, the worker is expected to maintain the status quo and adapt to system requirements, right? You're just going to keep going and doing, you know, your treatment case plans, the case center, and you're just expected to maintain, these are your policies and procedures, this is what you do. In an advocacy model, we're looking always to the social and systems change, right? And so if we are going to responding at a hospital for a sexual assault exam and the doctor or the nurse or somebody does not respond appropriately to that victim, we are going to follow up with that hospital. And we are going to talk about what happened and how we can make changes so that doesn't happen again. So we are always trying to look at ways that we can shift and change those systems so they're more victim-centered and have a better response. Questions, comments, thoughts?
I have so many thoughts.
Well, by all means.
Well, you know what I was thinking about when on the political bullet point, like I remember when I first learned about Rosa Parks sitting in the spot that she wasn't supposed to on the bus. And I was fed the line throughout my youth that she was just a tired woman who didn't want to get up from her spot because she'd been working all day. And that in and of itself was enough for me. But what we're not taught is that it was highly organized and planned that she was going to do that. She had a group of people that's that activism piece that comes with advocacy, right? Or look at our treaty laws. You know, there's people who organize and they go and set net on a lake that is illegal for us to set net on, and they're doing it intentionally to challenge the law, the Supreme Court ruling, right? Like, so I'm not advocating for all of us to go out and like go to that level, but be thinking about ways that we can start moving the needle on the systems that are impacting us in real time every day.
Yeah. That's a good point. And that was a very highly organized thing. It was not like just this tired woman, and it had been planned for a long time. And there's a lot of parallels with what's happening today, and thinking about like, what are the boycotts of today that will make an impact to shift? Because there's certainly, I think we're in a time, I keep thinking about like, in 50 years, what is the story that's going to be told about this time? Because in the last, 2 years, 3 years, like things have really, maybe even 5 years, like things are really shifting and changing. So I've been thinking a lot about that. So the advocate is a biased supporter of survivors. And we are not an unbiased person. We are a biased supporter of survivors. And I think it's really, really important to remember that. We are there to support them. And I was having a conversation with someone one time, and they were like, well, so if a woman tells you that she's been raped, do you just believe them? And I was like, yeah, why wouldn't I believe her? Like, yep, I do. And that's my role as an advocate, is to believe them and to support them. And we focus on their expressed needs, their interests, their safety needs, and the needs of their children as well, right? Because, oftentimes we don't come alone, right? We have our children with us as well. And we need to have and create safe spaces for them and help them to have safe spaces in their home and to have resources to regain control over their lives with whatever that means for them.
Linda tells a story about when she was working with some folks and the woman was asking for tires for her vehicle. And so, maybe your advocacy program, when she was sexually assaulted, comes in for advocacy, and when they ask her what she wants tires on her vehicle. So, if you're not careful, you can say, well, we don't offer tires for a vehicle here, right? So what advocacy is being creative, like how can we get this woman tires on her vehicle so she can do X, Y, and Z for her life, right? And that's what that expressed biased support means, is that we be creative on our end. And what she ended up doing, and I might get it a little wrong, but she accessed some church resources to be able to fund groceries or something like that. So then the mom had money to buy tires for her car because her groceries were covered. So be thinking about what we can do within our own programs creatively that way, building relationships with other resources, other types of that have more latitude in how they can spend their money, right? Because OVW money tends to be a little restrictive sometimes in what we can provide for folks. So yeah, just being creative and problem solving, that's what advocacy is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, advocacy certainly takes a great deal of creativity, because oftentimes our resources are very slim and we need to learn how to stretch them and to access other resources. What other resources do we have? Providing leadership and expertise to assist survivors and victims as they navigate all the systems, right? The justice system, law enforcement, social services, medical systems, all of the systems. And it's complicated. If you look at the multiple systems that, if it's a current sexual assault, the multiple systems that a victim will encounter is, it's overwhelming, right? And it's not surprising that some people opt to not go through with all of it. But to help provide leadership and help them to navigate those systems, to explain those systems, to explain it in a way that's easily understandable for them, because oftentimes the documents that they get, all the paperwork, all the forms they have to fill out is not very easy to understand. So we need to have ways to help them to sift through that, to understand, to translate it into language that makes sense.
And to slow the process down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Feel bombarded with all the things. Well, you got to report to the police and you got to go get the forensic exam and you got to do this and you got to do that, right? Like we can slow that process down because we understand the pathways, right? Give them time to make the information understandable.
Yes. And then prioritizing safety and offender accountability, right? It's about, that accountability. It's not about what the victim needs to do to change. It's about the acts of the perpetrator. Confidentiality again, and then looking at that social and systems change. And you see, this is like from Mending the Sacred Hoop in 1996, and it is still so incredibly relevant, like, how many years later.
Nicole, Mary posted in the chat, can you address what advocacy looks like when supporting someone, a survivor, and it becomes apparent that both individuals are surviving or doing harm to each other? For example, multiple consent issues.
Well, so I guess I would need a little bit more context, but if someone comes to me and says, someone, perpetrated harm against me, I'm going to help them and I'm going to advocate for them. And I guess the way I always look at it is, it's not my role to investigate. I'm not a cop. I'm there as a biased supporter of survivors. And so if someone comes to me and says they're a victim and they've been harmed and they need my assistance, I'm going to help them. There's many programs have conflict of interest policy, so you would not be able to work with both people. So it gets complicated. But I guess for me, if someone came to me and said I was harmed, then I would help them.
I might add, if you have the ability to get another advocate involved for the other person, that might be a pathway as well.
Or even if there's a neighboring program that could help so that both people don't show up at the same time, because that can be a challenge. I know I used to work in a program that was a domestic violence and sexual assault program years ago. And I was working with a woman who was being abused by her husband. And then her husband came in because he had been sexually assaulted in prison. And he wanted to talk about that, but he also wanted to know if his wife was coming there. And so, you know, it can really pose a conflict of interest because sometimes they'll want to know information about the same. So if you have the ability also to have another program that you can refer them to, that can be helpful as well. And I see Debbie raised her hand.
Yeah, it's kind of around the same. I had a client one time that was a victim with one man, but with another man, she was the abuser. So we had to work with her, work with the victim when she abused him. And then when she came in, she was the victim of an abuser. So she was actually the victim and the abuser.
Awesome. All right.
Next slide.
Please. So looking again at the role of the advocate, we want to make sure we honor the experiences of each survivor. And again, that we're believing them, right? And it's not up to us to investigate, but just to honor their experiences and to trust that they're capable of making their own decisions. Just because someone's going through a traumatic experience or going through some sort of crisis does not mean that they don't have the ability to make their own decisions. Doesn't mean that there's something inherently wrong with them or that they're incompetent. We need to make sure that we trust that they have that ability. In supporting that survivor in self-identifying, right? Noting the distinction between cases, clients, and using their name. I even think like sometimes I've heard sometimes we refer to we forget that they have a name and say, oh, well, mom said blah, 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 or, you know, but they're human beings. So we want to make sure we really uphold that and honor them as people, right? They're people first. They're not just a victim. They're not just a mother or a partner or whatever, like they're a human being. And so we want to make sure we honor all of them. Ensuring that they're not forced to cooperate or follow rules that might jeopardize their safety, or rules that fail to honor their personal sovereignty. That we're always looking back to that. What is that? How do we make sure that their personal, their body, their sovereignty is upheld and that they're not forced to cooperate, certainly by us or anybody else, because law enforcement can sure make them feel like they're forced to cooperate. And if they don't want to go through with it, they don't have to, right? They're the victim, they're not the perpetrator. Find practitioners that focus on the harm of the offender and not the actions, circumstances of survivors. I think that's really critical. It's really not about what the victim did or how flawed they are. It's about the harm of the offender. It's about this external thing that happened to the offender or to the victim by the offender. And that's what we should focus on. In maintaining that focus on the responsibility of offenders and how systems respond. And you will hear this over and over and over again through our entire curriculum. You know, if we could have ended sexual violence by fixing victims, we would have ended it a long time ago because they've spent a lot of years trying to fix them. It is not about what victims do or don't do. It's about someone making a decision to use sex as a tool or a weapon against another human being and causing what can be lifelong trauma for that person.
Well, I would add about, you know, finding practitioners that focus on the harm of the offender. That doesn't mean somebody who works with perpetrators are off the table or whatever. What it means is it's about a philosophy, like an internal philosophy with how we think about sexual violence, right? And Nicole has said it, I think Kayla said it earlier, folks have said it many times, that it's not something, we're not our sexual assault, right? Like somebody makes a decision, a choice in a moment to cause harm. And so it's just about a philosophy that understands that there's way more at play than just one individual who makes a choice. It's also a culture of violence that we're living in. It's also a tolerance of the sexism and the commercialness of sexuality, right? Like you can't even buy an iced tea without a woman, you know, laying on a beach like this or something, right? So it's built in structurally to our culture at this point. And so it's about a philosophy of making sure that that practitioner understands that that individual is not the one who caused it. And it can be really easy to sound like that. Even Oprah, when, I mean, my mom, Sandy, gets mad at Oprah because Oprah will ask somebody on the TV, this is of course many years ago, but Oprah will ask a survivor or victim, well, how come you didn't say anything? And so my mom doesn't like to hear that sentence because it implies that the victim should have said something to make it better or to make it stop. So just kind of like be thinking about the ways that language and systems uphold this idea that there's something that the victim could have done or shouldn't have done. Really, we want to switch that focus to the perpetrator making a choice or the harm doer making a choice in the culture that supports that.
Yes. All right. We want to make sure that mental health, chemical dependency, or other issues not directly related to the crime are noted, but prioritized appropriately. You know, there's a lot of rules about how victims should behave in order to receive services. And I know we have, there's many programs that say that people have to be sober to access services. But, you know, I think that's sometimes using drugs and alcohol is a coping skill, right? Sometimes it is helping them to cope with something that's really traumatic. And so we need to be able to meet them where they are and still to provide those services because they're clearly needing services. And that doesn't mean we should say, hey, you need to stop drinking or whatever. Like if they're still coming in and they're saying, I just need to talk for an hour. Okay, then I'm here to listen. I'm all ears, right? But to try and, you know, prioritize them appropriately. You know, if they come to us next month and they say, I really would love to get into a chemical dependency program, I feel like I need help with that, or can you help me? Absolutely. I will absolutely help you with that. But that we're not making it now, that's the issue. Because, you know, I can see X, Y, and Z. So now I'm going to prioritize this as the issue. That we don't advocate for anything that would compromise their personal sovereignty or anything that would reinforce any form of oppression or even internalized oppression, because certainly we have internalized a whole lot of things that have been said, whether it be about women, about Native people, you know, about LGBTQ two-spirit people. Like we've internalized a lot of stuff. So we want to make sure that we are not advocating for anything that would compromise personal sovereignty or that would reinforce any of those stereotypes or beliefs or any of the internalized messages that we've carried, or anything that creates barriers that might prevent or limit access to safety or resources. I think it's really important to be mindful of that. And then I think it's really critical that we do not speak ever for or on behalf of a victim without their permission, without their informed consent. That they know exactly if they sign a release of information, that we should be clear about, you know, what we are going to share. And if they say, no, you can share this, but you can't share that, okay, then we'll share this and not that, right? It is with their permission, and we should never be speaking for them or on behalf of them without that permission. I think that's really important, which goes back to the privacy and confidentiality, right?
In the systems, right? Like, because your system may say you have to get this particular piece of information, but if she doesn't or they don't want it shared, then you don't do it. So that means you're kind of defying your own system. And so you might have to do some advocacy within your organization at that moment, right?
Yes. Questions or comments? I see. Is there stuff in the chat?
No, it's just making comments about using sex to sell butter.
I didn't know it was sexy butter. I'm cracking myself up now.
We must never forget that violence ends through social change. Like I said, it does not end by fixing victims. It ends by changing the systems, changing social norms, changing this society and our world that allows it to continue, that makes excuses for it, that says boys will be boys, and so that's why they do X, Y, and Z. We need to work on changing attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. We must never forget that the role of systems change work, which focuses on the safety and offender accountability. Again, going back to holding offenders accountable and changing the systems that create a climate where this is able to happen. And then we want to never dismiss the reality that conflicts are teachable moments for all involved, including advocates. You know, and there's so many, I think, teachable moments. We could probably think to a number of them that we've had in our own lives, of whether it's a conflict or a growing pain or a challenge that we've experienced, and it may be really painful, but we've learned from it, right? We've grown from it, and sometimes we don't learn from it and then we have to repeat it. But looking at conflicts as teachable moments so that we can try and step away from them and not get so engaged in the back and forth of it, I think is really important.
And not taking it personal, right? So survivors are going to have all kinds of things that should come up for them. And the things that go on in our lives are always personal, right? And so as advocates, we have to be careful to make a separation between, like, it's not about us half the time, it's because a lot of different circumstances, but anytime we can take a pause and see what what they're really trying to communicate and what do we have to learn about ourselves. I think back to when we had some folks come to a MIWSAC coalition meeting to talk about prostitution. And back in those days, I had the idea, like the Pretty Woman movie ideas about prostitution, that, she was making a lot of money and Richard Gere, is going to sweep her off her feet. And I am so embarrassed that I had that notion about prostitution, because how was I supposed to know? Nobody ever taught me the realities of that sometimes you gotta do things to put food in your children's mouths and diapers on their buns, but I didn't know that. So we all have these moments where we learn, to think, even to hear the word oppression, right? Or patriarchy. Those are all things that we don't learn that stuff in school. By design, we're not taught those things in school. So, be okay with those teachable moments and don't take it personal and do your best to keep learning.
Yes. All right. Yeah. as advocates, we ask, we listen, we believe, and we respectfully act on what the survivor states they want and need. Always going back to believing survivors and making sure that we are listening to them. That, you know, I think there are so many more things that pull us away from being present these days. And I think it's vitally important that we are as present as possible when a survivor comes in, because we've all felt it when we've been sitting there trying to talk to someone about something very personal, exactly, and someone's staring at their phone or looking, and it feels like we're not important. At least it does for me. You know, I know it's our cell phones are like attached to us. It's like another appendage. It's like my other arm, right? Our cell phones. But we must be as present as possible. Let's put them away and let's really make sure that we're listening to when a victim comes in, that we can be as present as possible with them. And that we always send the message that, you know, violence is unacceptable, that it is a crime, that they are never at fault. I think that is so important. I can't tell you how many victims I have heard that said nobody ever said that to them. Nobody ever said it's not your fault. And sometimes it shuts people down, and maybe they won't tell anyone else if they don't hear that. And sometimes they've told someone and someone said it was your fault, and they didn't tell anybody else for a long time. So I think it's really important that we tell them that it's not their fault, they're never at fault, and that the fault lies solely with the person who caused violence. Alrighty, looking at options and victim rights. A victim has a right to have an advocate from the time that they disclose to any service provider. So work with your systems, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's medical, prosecution, wherever, that if someone discloses and asks for an advocate, that they can call your program, that they can call you, so that an advocate can be with them through that whole process. And that they know that that's even an option, because some people just don't know. And then when they hear advocate, people are like, well, what's that? So educating also those systems, so that the systems also know how, you know, how much you can be helpful to that victim. That, you know, that the victim will have their options explained in order to make an informed decision. And again, explained in a way that's easy to understand, because I think so much of the information is hard to understand and it's confusing. That they have their choices respected always, no matter what system they're dealing with. That part of our role is to make sure that their choices are respected. If halfway through the sexual assault exam, she says, I want to leave, then we're going to help her to leave. Right? When you look at medical, you know, certainly the medical exam immediately after a sexual assault is for evidence collection, right? That is what their role is to collect evidence for prosecution. They are going to look at injuries to treat injuries. They will look at STIs, sexually transmitted infections, so they can treat for STIs. And then to the, you know, if they're able to get it, we don't know how this will play out in all states right now. But emergency contraception, if you're able to access it. And I know all states are not able to access it right now.
A whole new level of advocacy right now that has come down since this training was written, right? Like that has always been our right to have an access to contraception or emergency contraception or abortion. And that is different now. So
yeah. Yeah. Looking at legal, they have the right to file a complaint, a criminal complaint. There may be a situation where if the perpetrator is known to the victim, and so they may need a protection order. And so helping them through that system is really important, helping them to fill out forms, helping them in court, helping them if they're filing a criminal complaint, with the investigation, with the interview, with the law enforcement. And then again, the advocacy, support, and education through all of it. Comments or questions? I feel like I'm giving everyone the side eye because my thing is over to the side. I'm like, maybe I should have it on top. I just caught a glimpse of myself and I was side-eyeing everybody. Okay. So when you look at advocacy support, I know that not all tribal programs have 24-hour crisis intervention. So if you do not have 24-hour crisis intervention, it's important to have, your phones that roll over to a crisis line, or that you list a 24-hour crisis line so that victims are able to access that, because certainly, sexual violence doesn't happen 9 to 5, right? It most oftentimes happens outside of those, regular office hours. So victims really need a 24-hour crisis intervention response. They need to be able to have accompaniment to the hospital for a 24-hour outreach, to have that medical advocacy, and someone who can provide that information and support at that at the hospital. Looking at legal advocacy and needing the information and support, like what's going to happen if I report this? What does the process look like? The criminal process look like? What are the cops going to do? Am I going to have to interview? Will I have to be alone? What is the courts going to look like? Do I have to testify in front of him? Can I have someone with me? Am I going to be safe in the courtroom? All of these things, right? And needing someone to accompany them to, whether it's meetings at law enforcement or prosecutor's office, attending hearings with them, talking to them about trial preparation and how to not just prepare their testimony, but to prepare spiritually and emotionally, because it takes so much at those trials and it's very scary. And so how to work with them also on that spiritual and emotional preparation. Being a voice to other service providers as appropriate. Again, if you have a signed release of information, being able to talk to other service providers if the victim has asked you to. Certainly, not without that permission first. I think one of the biggest pieces of sexual assault advocacy is one-to-one support. Oftentimes, a large number of people that will call a crisis line are people who experienced sexual violence years ago. And something might have, they may be having a flashback. Something in the news might have triggered a memory, a smell, something they may have, ran into the perpetrator. Something might have happened that have brought them back to a place where they need to talk to someone, where they feel like they're in crisis right now, and they need some support. So I think knowing how to, do one-to-one support and to really be present and to listen and to, offer that help to victims is probably going to be one of the #1 jobs of advocates. And then looking at referrals, I think knowing who to refer to for spiritual or cultural support, I think is really critical. And I think it's also vitally critical to make sure that we know who our safe resources are for spiritual and cultural support, because we want to make sure that we are making good referrals and that they will not, be facing more harm. they may ask for therapy or some sort of counseling services. And again, knowing who our resources are, do we have Native specific therapists or counseling services? Are they good? Are they people that, have worked with other victims that we've worked with and we know that they've had a good outcome? And you know what, sometimes what works for one person doesn't work for the next person. And so, maybe it won't work for this person. So having a number of therapists, if possible. I know in tribal communities, it's hard. You may only have one to refer them to. Looking at chemical dependency programs that you can refer them to, the ones for at least, from the women that we've talked to that were used in prostitution and trafficking, the chemical dependency programs that were most helpful were ones that were culturally based, that really incorporated culture and spirituality into their chemical dependency program. And that was the one that, people really found to be the most useful. And referrals to social services, if appropriate. They may need help with, there may be some issues with, with ICWA or child protection. They may need to get on assistance because they might need financial support or emergency financial services. So being able to work with them on that as well. Support groups can sometimes be really helpful because sometimes it's helpful to be able to talk to other people who've been through something similar. And, sometimes, we can do them like talking circles. And sometimes it's helpful to have, maybe it's a regalia making class or circle. Because sometimes when we're busy doing things, whether it's sewing, whether it's drawing or painting or beading or whatever, people, they're not looking at each other, they're focused on something else, and it feels safer, right? Like everybody's not staring at you because they're doing their own thing, right? And so people start talking. And so, if support groups or talking circles are not working well, maybe thinking about doing something more community or a cultural crafting or regalia making or something circle.
Going to a forum or something like that, or a Take Back the Night event, something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Which goes back to that like community mobilizing and organizing.
Go
ahead.
I just wanted to add one of the things that I think is so important that really I hope we remember as advocates is putting that decision back in that person's hands. Or I don't know if the English word of permission is the appropriate word, but sometimes we need permission to say, you know what, I don't like that person. I don't want to keep going to them. One of the things that when I was coming out of my violence, I was very self-destructive and angry. Like I was so angry. And so my mom found an anger management therapist for me. But that anger management therapist invited me into their space and gave me tea and had pretty pictures on the walls. And it was so not what I needed. But my advocate gave me permission to say, well, if that person doesn't work for you, then let's find somebody else, right? So sometimes we need to hear, it's not that, think permission is the right word, but I hope that makes sense, that our advocate can confirm for us that we have choices now and we can make those choices. And what does it look like to say, no, I'm not going to go forward with that particular person because they're not a good fit for me, and make the changes. And sometimes we will need a little support to try it out, right? Because sometimes we're rookies at being able to make our own decisions.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point, Christine. And then that last piece about educating, supporting supportive friends and extended family, because when sexual violence happens, when trauma happens to a person, when there's experienced trauma by a person, it also impacts their friends, their family, their loved ones. And so they also need support and education. And maybe it's not from you, maybe there's another advocate that can work with them. Or maybe, you know, they just need some education on sexual violence, but it's helpful for them to also have some information so that the victim doesn't feel like they need to educate their family and their friends. Okay. Now we're ready. And then always, so you will see this slide with different words, of course, the implications for change in every single module, because it's important always to think about how are we creating change? What does systems and social change look like? So looking at observing how practitioners respond, right? If they're, you know, going back to if someone's, you know, having a sexual assault exam and the doctor or the nurse who's doing the exam responds inappropriately. I had years ago when I was doing advocacy, I had a doctor who I was in an exam and the woman was sexually assaulted by her ex-partner. And the doctor made a comment about like, well, maybe you'll leave him alone now. And I was like, excuse me? Like, and so as an advocate, it's our role to report those things, right? But what's not our role is to not do it in the moment necessarily, like, because it may be very uncomfortable for the victim in that moment. So maybe you pull them aside, maybe you talk to their supervisor afterwards, but to address it so that it never happens to someone else. And you know, what I did in that moment too was just when he left the room, I talked to her about, you know, it is not your fault. You can go back to your partner 1,000 times. And if he commits violence against you, it is still on him. It is not, has nothing to do with what you did. But we want to make sure that we are reporting situations like that so they don't happen again. Looking at sexual assault response teams, which can be really helpful, you know, and provide that multidisciplinary coordination to improve responses, so that you have all of those systems players that are coming together. They're developing protocols together. They're talking about what is a victim-centered response. And also that's a place where you can say, hey, you know, this happened at your hospital last week and, you know, this was really harmful. So another way to also have that accountability. When we look at social change, you know, the community education, going back to that engaging and mobilizing community, doing that public speaking and the education to inform other agencies about sexual violence, to talk to whether it be schools or medical. You know, when we had one year, we used to do presentations to around like Child Abuse Prevention Month. And they used to do this hands are not for hitting. And we did a presentation in an elementary school class for hands are not for hitting. They just had to draw like a poster of their, you know, why hands are not for hitting. And this little girl, she was 10, drew a door with a lock on it. And, you know, they partnered them up with other kids and they were, the other little kid was like, why did you draw a door with a lock on it? And the little girl said, well, that's the lock that my mom bought me because her dad was sexually abusing her dad and her brothers. And so, you know, mandated report that ended up, her father and her brothers were prosecuted. But, you know, educating and that community education, had that little girl not spoken up in that moment, right? Like how many more years of violence would she have experienced at the hands of her relatives had there not been those public speaking opportunities, which was a poster campaign, you know. And community awareness, looking at activities that raise awareness about sexual violence, you know, like the Take Back the Night events and a community speak out or a community forum. And shifting the blame to the perpetrator, always, always, always to the perpetrator. It's not about what the victim did. We need to shift our ideas about how to make change and how to change this world so that sexual violence doesn't happen.
And even social media movements, right? The Me Too movement was, that awareness can come in so many forms.
Totally.
Entries, right? Lots of different ways.
I think that's the last slide, right?
The last slide.
Yay. Comments or questions? You guys are still here. It's a lot to take in, and I think as the 40-hour, as it progresses, it's hard. It's hard to listen to a lot of this, and it's hard to process, and it may trigger us too in some of our own stuff. And so also, just want to say, make sure you take care of yourself during the training and also after the training. Don't get off after a 40-hour after the training and then go read a bunch of stuff on social media or watch the news, because then your blood pressure will really rise. Go watch some cute, cat videos on YouTube or something. Brings joy to you, or go outside and feel the breeze and feel the air, put your feet on the ground. Rebecca always talks about grounding, actually putting her feet on the ground and how much that helps her. So do stuff that really takes care of you. Drink your water. Debbie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I like the part about the bias, knowing, like what your limits are. And it is about, advocacy is all about helping someone. So your bias could hurt them. So knowing it and allowing them to heal, because it's not about you as an advocate, it's about them. So knowing your boundaries so that you can help them on their journey.
Absolutely. Thank you. Other comments?
Kind of makes me remind me of when I was early in my advocacy at a clinic, and sometimes I would be more angry than the survivor, and I would be inclined in my anger at that moment to call something out. But when there's so many compounding emotions, it can make the survivor feel like nothing's going right for me. I should have never went through this process. It's not even right, or just even reporting it. So yeah, just really being conscious of watching your own anger and your own outrage, because it could really go onto the survivor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't ever want the survivor to think they have to take care of us, right? Like, great, now I have to manage your anger too. Like, yeah, good point, Afton. Other thoughts or things you're sitting with right now?
Well, I guess I'm not sure, but as far as, since we are advocates, we're technically mandated reporters, correct? So how how would that play with, like, within the family, or within seeing someone you don't even know, or seeing something happen, or hearing something happen, I guess, is my question.
Well, I think, so we'll get into some of the more nuances around mandated reporting, but one, I think, depending on where you are located and what state you're in, and making sure that you know the laws for that area. Because that's really going to, be a better indicator of, oh, in Wisconsin, they're not mandatory reporters. So as you can see, it depends. It depends on where you're located. So it's important to know what the mandatory reporting laws are in your state, and then follow them. But I know that we will be able to get more.
Okay, yeah. I know that to follow them, I'm from White Earth too, so yeah, I know that, so we'll just go over that more later, and my question will probably make more sense then.
And I know sometimes it can be really nuanced in terms of like a mandatory reporter is like a certain law and has like a bunch of rules that go with it. And there is a human component of the risk that comes with, especially in our own communities, right? Like, gosh, do I say anything? And then, what's going to happen if I do? And what if I don't say anything? And what's going to happen if I don't? So any human being is going to have an internal dialogue about that, the risks. And that's exactly what advocacy is we have that internal dialogue and we weigh out, the pros and the cons and the options and the strategies. And we always err on the side of safety and life, right? So if there are children or people in harm's way, risk is necessary to stop that violence, to interrupt that violence. And I would hope that somebody who saw the violence happening in our home, I wish they would have said something, right? So I don't know what the rest of the details are. I just know that we'll be exploring that more throughout the month, that it is not an easy black and white, cut and dried thing. It's really scary and can be dangerous, all the things all at once. And we'll talk more about it too.
Yeah, it's challenging. And you can always, like, if you're working with a family, to talk to the caretaker, the primary caretaker who's coming in, and just say, I am a mandatory reporter and I am going to have to make this report, and we can do this together. And this is how I can support your family, or, so there are some ways, but it is complicated depending on what the situation, I don't know what the situation is, but.
Okay, yeah. Thank you though, I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, and it's nice to meet you. I didn't even.
Nice to meet you guys too. I know my volume wasn't working earlier, so yeah.
Awesome. Can't wait to see you at one of our in-person meetings.
Me too. I'm new.
Awesome. I'm glad you're here. Any other final thoughts or questions? All righty. Well, thank you.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today. It's awesome to hear your insight and your words and your love for the peoples. Glad you're here with us. So how this goes is that I will stop the recording here in a little while, and then it has to render and do all the things that recordings do. And then I'll make a link to it in a Google Drive, and then you'll be able to just click on the link and it will take you to a folder for day one. So the day one folder is going to have all the PowerPoints, all the participant binder content, because obviously we're virtual and I'm not going to send a giant, 4-inch thick binder to you. So, but I'll send you, the document that all the stuff is in. And any appendices, like I dropped the appendices in the chat for the principles of advocacy. you know, we have a lot of appendices that go with this and like to kind of back up the documentation of the things that we're talking about. So all that stuff will be in each day. And then the PowerPoint will go in there. And then if you all share resources with the group, I can be sure to add the resources you share into that folder as well. So then you'll have, at the end of the training, you'll have 8 days of folders of content, including like all the paper and all of the video recordings. And I think that's about that. And then we'll stay on. So we'll conclude by 4:30 every day, or 4:30 Central every day. But we'll also, me and what other staff is able to, will stay on afterwards when we shut the recording off. And just for like a more informal debrief, or if people have questions that they don't really want to ask on camera or on recording, we'll have a chance to kind of ask those questions after. And then we know that folks have to log off and get on with their lives. And then some people have questions that they really want to ask outside of that recorded space. And so I'll be here for a little while. You're welcome to stay on with me. And for everybody else, thank you so much. Nicole really nailed it when she said, drink your water, get outside, let the sun or the rain or whatever is in your world come onto your face and be connected. And process as you must with who you must. And we will be back on Thursday, same time, same station, same link, same process. And we'll be going through the sexual violence with an oppression analysis module, and then sex offenders, what advocates need to know. And that will be on day 2. And so Afton had dropped in the chat the agenda for the month. And you know, each day we'll do, after these first 2 days, we'll be able to get through, hopefully we'll be able to get through 3 modules a day. There's a total of 20 modules, and you'll kind of see the flow as we get going. All right. Okay. All right, well, also I'm going to shut the recording off, and you're welcome to stay for the debrief. Otherwise, we'll see you on Thursday. Nicole, thank you so much for our ASL interpreters. Unless somebody needs ASL interpretation in the debrief, we'll see you on Thursday. But if somebody needs the interpretation, please do a direct message to one of us, and we can have them stay on. Afton, are you able to drop the month, the full agenda into the chat again?
Yes, I can.
All right, I'm going to stop this recording.